Hi, Colin Davis here. So what I'd like to do here is to present a hopefully very concise presentation of the the major tenets of the work that I'm doing with Melissa Mari that we discuss in our book Shadow Tech. And and I have a number of videos out there, and there's interviews, and the book is available, of course. But I wanted to make something very concise and to the point for professionals, for Jungians, for people who are intimately familiar with the destructive processes in the psyche, with the shadow in a Jungian understanding. And what I'm going to discuss here is a model that doesn't exactly come out of a Jungian understanding, but which doesn't require that we modify the Jungian understanding of the shadow. It's just another model. It's a sort of a systems level model that we can put on top of what we're already working with. And so this is a hypothesis for psychic parasitism. So this is a hypothesis that says that that the psyche is directly interrelated and is self-similar to other systems in nature. That that one of the most prominent forms of relationship profiles in the biosphere is parasitism, and that we should be able to extrapolate what we see about destructive relationship cycles in nature onto the psyche and onto human culture. And what we're saying is that if you will look at destructive cycles in the psyche, addictions, destructive relationship cycles, also destructive cultural cycles, through the lens of biological parasitism, then we believe that you will see a self-similarity there, and that your understanding of parasitism in nature, and also in computer information systems, which also harbor parasites, if you will look at it through that lens, then you may be able to visualize destructive patterns in the human being more clearly, and that you may be able to come up with healing modalities, because you can learn from how you deal with parasites and pathogens in biology and apply that to psychic processes. So, so one of the major aspects, or one of the things that we stand on to be able to present this, is a concept that Ken Wilber has developed pretty thoroughly, which is called holarchy, which is really just a new version of the Hermetic maxim, as above, so below. And so in this understanding, we can see that natural systems or entities in nature, which he calls holons, can be seen as both singular and communal in nature. And that every holon, or every entity, is an individual, but is also a gigantic community of constituent parts, and is a member of a greater gigantic community. Whether this is an atom, or whether this is a cell, or whether this is a human being, they all have this sort of dual, singular, communal nature to them. And in this way, systems in the universe are all interlocking and interconnected. Well, there's another tenet of holarchy, which is that of a self-similarity, or fractal-type repetition of fundamental organizing principles in nature. And that within this holonic structure of nature, organizing principles which work well tend to repeat. And so you can see examples of this all throughout nature. And if you stand on this and take that seriously, then you should be able to go into a domain like the psyche, which is itself an ecosystem of energy and information. And you should be able to go into the psyche and find direct relationships between the psyche and other systems in nature. Obviously, the psyche or the human mind is directly related to human culture. And we see that the mind is a microscopic correlate of the culture, and that these are holons, these are interlocking holons that are interconnected. So, of course, Jung noticed this and noticed that fundamental motifs in the psyche also appear in the culture, and fundamental motifs in the culture are always present in the psyche. So there's that self-similar fractal-like relationship. So what we're saying with this concept of psychic parasitism is that if you look at the psyche like a biological ecosystem, or you could look at the psyche like John Lilly did as a biocomputer operating system, then you can see that destructive processes in these kinds of ecosystems, whether they're natural ecosystems or computer ecosystems, they both harbor pathogens. They both harbor parasitic entities which take advantage of host organisms to further their own life cycle. Now, if you go to biology and you look at the subject of parasitism, you'll find that it is one of the most prevalent types of relationship profiles in the biosphere. You'll see that parasitism is a very, very common way that organisms get along. Now, it's on the destructive side of things. There's on the more beneficial or creative side, there is symbiosis, and the ultimate version of that is mutualism. But parasitism, predation and parasitism on the destructive side are extremely common and prevalent. And so would you not see those in the psyche? You do see those in computer operating systems. You do see viruses. You do see malicious scripts and pathogens in computer information systems. You do see that in the human body, and you do see that in all of the natural world. And so would you not see that in the psyche, which is a product of the natural world, and where you have that fundamental self-similar repetition in nature? So would that not be there? So the question is if you think it might be there, then you just have to go look in the psyche, go look for the effects of parasitic relationships in the psyche, and do you find those effects? Now, Melissa and I have been studying this very closely for the last few years, and we've been looking at our own destructive relationship cycles. We've been looking at the other destructive processes that have gone on in our lives, all of our lives. We are two individuals who are definitely on a healing path, and we've been using the container of our relationship as really as an alchemical vessel for transmuting all of this old destructive shadow material. And out of that intention is that intention is what basically turned on this, I guess you could say it's the magician archetype in Jungian terms, and this understanding started to flood in. And so when we look at destructive cycles, let's say, for example, addictions. If you look at addictions and you look at how at the moods, and if you look at the psychic operation of an addictive cycle, and how it builds and rises and falls, and how it repeats itself, and how it destroys the greater organism of the human being in the process, just a little bit at a time. And if you study how the testimony of addicts and the dreams of addicts, and you start to look for the underlying psychic contents or material that relates to an addictive cycle, I think that you'll find that it looks just like parasitism in nature. So in the book, we described this this particular microscopic parasite called Toxoplasma gondii, and it's this little parasite that gets into the intestines of cats, and it needs to get into the intestines of cats and also rodents, like rats, for example, to further its own life cycle. And so it gets into the intestines of the cat, it lays its eggs in there, those eggs are then passed through the cat feces, and a rat will come along, or a mouse, for example, and eat the cat feces. And then this parasite will hatch in the intestines of the rat, and then it will travel up the bloodstream, past the blood-brain barrier, into the rat's brain. And then this little parasite knows exactly where to go in the rat's brain to alter that rat's neurons, brain cells, to turn off its ability to smell cat urine. And so now, once this parasite has infected these particular brain cells, the rat cannot smell cat urine anymore. And so therefore, it will start to hang out in areas that are frequented by cats, and it will ultimately get eaten. And so then it'll find itself back into the intestines of a cat, where it can lay its eggs again and continue on its reproductive cycle. So this is a very interesting, but also very common way in which parasites operate. They use trickery, they use some blind spot in the host organism, in the perception of the host organism, to take advantage of that host organism. The rabies virus is like this. I mean, they're all like this. The rabies virus will cause the infected animal to become highly aggressive and to attack another animal, and then it will bite another animal, and then the rabies virus will travel from the attacker's saliva into the bloodstream of the victim and continue on its life cycle. Well, so this is going on all throughout nature, and viruses are doing this to our cells, and they're constantly trying to get into our cells at every moment. So this is a continual battle that's going on in the biosphere, is organisms trying to resist parasitism. It's everywhere. So with that kind of prevalence, of that relationship profile, and with the self-similarity of patterns in the universe, or in nature, in the biosphere, and we know that in computer information systems we have these kinds of attackers, we have these kinds of parasites. So would they not be in the psyche? And so we have a term that we call the victim-victor cycle, which sort of describes the rise and fall of this parasitic feeding cycle in the psyche. And it applies to addictions, it applies to destructive relationship cycles, it applies to destructive internal mood swings, it applies to cultural disputes. It can be extrapolated all over the place. And so let me now talk about how this comes into effect. And I think it comes into effect similarly to the way that it does in biology and in computer information systems. And that is that, for example, the human body, you may inherit a particular propensity or genetic weakness, which makes your physiology, which makes your structure susceptible to a particular type of viral infection. You also might be wounded. So, for example, let's say in the human body, if you cut your arm, for example, the first thing that's going to happen is that all your immune system is going to start sending agents up to the location of the wound and start repairing the wound and start warding off pathogens, microscopic viruses, bacteria, which are there to take advantage of the free energy. And so you may inherit a genetic weakness. You may suffer a wound, which may make you susceptible. Well, I think the same thing is happening in the psychic or physiological structure of the human being, where you can inherit these psychic viruses, psychic parasites. You could call them programs, you can call them patterns, you can call them entities, you can call them fields, whatever you want to call them. But you inherit them from your ancestry, and I think they're inherent. I think every culture has its own sort of particular ecosystem of these psychic parasites. But I think what's happening to a great degree is developmental wounding is giving rise to, or giving an opportunity for these destructive agents of the psyche. So one of the ways that we have hypothesized that this could come about is sort of in an endogenous way, where you would suffer a developmental wound, and then your archetypal psychic patterning would be fractured. You can explain this in a number of different ways, but your psychic patterning would be fractured through a developmental wound or through a specific trauma, and then it would be at the source of that wound. It would be at that psychic location or instance of that fracture where an autonomous entity would start to grow. So in this way, let's say if you were in a destructive household, if you had parents that had a very destructive relationship, for example, or you had parents that were themselves very wounded, or this can be to any degree, and your development is fractured, well then in that way, that developmental fracturing will basically be an open opportunity for a psychic script to form, which will form out of that opportunity and stay there and take advantage of your psyche through that opportunity, which this entity or program will then learn to trigger. And so what will basically happen is that the electrochemical blueprint of that developmental wound becomes the food source for a psychic autonomous entity, and then it will grow if the environment validates its life. In other words, repetition of these destructive or developmental wounding, just repetition of it in the household, for example, then this entity will grow out of that structure, out of that opportunity, and then it will become autonomous enough to be able to integrate into the psyche and to be able to stay there and then trigger the personality to be able to feed it with the same chemical structure that was formed originally at the source of the wound. And I hope that that's that's clear enough. And and so that's one way that we see these autonomous parasitic entities forming in the psyche is through that wounding, and again we see it through developmental wounding. Now we also have like a greater understanding of this within patriarchal culture, and how patriarchal culture is inherently wounding and punitive, and that it is actually a structure which greatly benefits or basically gives rise to these kinds of autonomous complexes. And we see things like Eastern yoga and meditation practices as essentially psychic hygiene practices to basically deal with this, which is an ongoing problem for every entity. And so we also, in our book, we talk about a process by John Ruskin, Ruskan, called emotional clearing, which has been very effective for us. And the way we see the way to deal with this situation is in the same way that you deal with parasites, with pathogens in biology. Now, the way that we dealt with microscopic parasites about 200 years ago, after we invented the microscope, we found out that there was this whole invisible world of pathogens, and they were the cause of all these plagues. And so the main way that we dealt with that was through sanitation and hygiene practices. Now, we did develop inoculations, vaccine technology, and I have a lot of questions about the current way in which that is being developed, but technically it should be good science. And but truthfully, the main way that we dealt with biological pathogens was through massive changes in our sanitation and hygiene practices. We cleaned up our act. We removed the food source that these pathogens were feeding on. And so, in a similar way, if we can go in, if we can remove the repressed energy, often which is caused by developmental wounding or specific trauma, and if we can channel out properly through proper physiological channels this repressed destructive emotional energy, which is the food source of these autonomous parasites, autonomous complexes, however you want to say it, then there's less for them to feed on. Then the rest of the psyche can take over, just like you do with a wound. All you have to do is keep the wound clean, remove any particles from it, air it out, keep it clean, and the body does the rest. But if you keep putting dirt on the wound, and if you do not air it out, well, then it will become infected, and then ultimately you could lose a limb. We feel that the same kind of healing practice should be done in terms of dealing with these destructive cycles in the psyche. Is that you have to locate the developmental wound which gave rise to these autonomous complexes, and then to air them out and ventilate them out. And so that's why we've been using Ruskin's emotional clearing practice, which basically uses a trigger. When you're triggered into a cycle, you use it as a doorway into the depth of the developmental wound, and you allow that original energy of anger, of rage, of guilt, of sadness to come forth. And I know in the case of Melissa and myself, this has been highly effective. But so this whole model here is we're taking this model, we're not we're putting it on top of the Jungian understanding of the shadow, and we're just putting this on with a systems level lens, and then seeing where we can go from here. So so that is the I think the main part of this, and there's more in our book, and we talk about cultural parasitism and things like this, but I think that's the main thing. And if this sounds interesting to you, if this sounds like something that you would want to take on more or study more on, you're free to read our book. We offer it for free, actually. And if you would like to give us constructive feedback, criticism, we would totally welcome that, because we're coming into this from the outside. We're artists. We are people who are working on ourselves, and I am someone who really I actually have a background in law and legal thinking, and so I kind of have this need to have a more objective kind of map. At the same time, I know that really that's all you can really do is make maps. You can't know objectively the psyche or any of these systems, but that's all I'm looking for is maps which can help me get closer to actual healing processes, and not only ones that work for me, but ones that can be that other people can use equally effectively. So yeah, thank you for listening, and stay in touch, and have a nice day.